The Northwest Law and Mental Health Conference brings together expert speakers with legal, clinical, and lived experience to discuss the impact of the law on people with mental illness and addiction. Our spring 2020 conference was postponed due to COVID-19, so presenters recorded their sessions, which are now embedded in the conference website along with their collateral information. Thanks to all our expert presenters, generous sponsors, exhibitors, volunteers, and the planning committee for the Northwest Law and Mental Health Conference. Stay well, and we hope to see you in 2021. Welcome back to the Northwest Law and Mental Health Conference. I'm Jason Renaud, and today I'm with Sergeant Amy King and Ann Larsen of the Olympia Police Department. Welcome.
Thanks. Thank you.
So we're going to talk a little bit about your programs for Homeless Street Outreach today. Why don't we start by telling the audience who each of you are and what your roles are in the program. Sergeant King?
So I'm Sergeant King. Amy is my first name. I currently am assigned to our downtown walking patrol for the police department. So we are either on foot or on bicycles. We started our walking patrol June 1st of 2018. So we're coming up on 2 years. We cover just the downtown area. I've been at OPD for a minute longer than the last 2 years, but that's what I'm doing now.
So just to give people down here in Portland and maybe up in other areas, just a little geographical information about Olympia. You have a very small downtown area. Mm-hmm. So walking it, when you say I'm walking, you really can walk from one side of a metropolitan Olympia to the other in 15 minutes.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. So our downtown, I don't know how many, it's about, 8 or 9 blocks by 8 or 9 blocks, I would say, technically, the way that we define it. We spend a good part of our time probably in more of a 3 or 4 block radius, just because that's where we're needed most. So the area is pretty small, yeah. And there's 6 officers and then myself.
Excellent. And tell us your role here.
Yeah, so I'm the Outreach Services Coordinator for the Police Department. And the citizens of Olympia passed a public safety levy in November of 2017 that expanded Amy's walking patrol, expanded community court, and also put money in for my position and the crisis response unit, which we'll talk about throughout this presentation. So I got hired in April of 2018, and really my role is to create and implement programs here at the police department for our outreach services. So that can look like a crisis response unit, which we have, and then we have a peer navigator program as well.
Oh, so part of, Annie, you're being hired with this public safety levy was to expand, to expand the 2 different programs. Tell us about the 2 different programs.
Sure, and so they weren't in existence, so I didn't get to expand them. I had to build them and then implement them. Sure, so they're 2 separate and distinct programs. The Crisis Response Unit officially celebrated their 1-year anniversary on April 1st. And it was we had a video card for them because of the times we're in. But the Crisis Response Unit runs 7 days a week from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. and it's teams of 2. So in the middle of the day, there's an overlap where you'll have 4 Crisis Response Unit team members on staff. We go by 4 guiding principles, which is street outreach, harm reduction, trauma-informed, and culturally competent. So what I heard loud and clear from our officers and service providers and downtown businesses is they wanted a response that was quick, that was available, and that would solve any sort of situation. So business owners, I don't want them to have in their mind a catalog of like, what's a crisis? Is this a crisis? Mm-hmm. We want them to just call non-emergency dispatch and have a crisis response unit respond to help de-escalate a situation, help someone that's confused, help someone that's maybe not leaving the restroom. So the crisis response unit is on police radio.
Right.
And so they'll hear all of the calls that are going on around the city. They also can be dispatched directly from the police department. So they carry cell phones. And so officers can either request them over the radio, or sometimes they might give them a call if it's like a call they've left or something they're following up on from a day before. They help respond with fire periodically. So fire can ask dispatch to send the crisis response unit if the person is really needing transportation to a shelter or emergent care instead of the ER. And then they get a lot of calls from our social service providers. So they get a lot of calls directly on their cell phone from our Union Gospel Mission, Inner City Transit, Community Care Center. And so they respond to those calls as well. Everything they do is out in the community. So nobody sets an appointment to come see our crisis response unit at an office. So they're either on foot or in their van, which is like a modified Sprinter van. And they can transport people with wheelchairs, dogs, shopping carts, all of that stuff. So that's really, really helpful in the work that they do. Even sometimes moving someone 3 blocks that is in a wheelchair, you need some way to get them from A to B. So that's, in a very quick nutshell, the crisis response unit. And then we have our Familiar Faces program, which started in November of 2018. And that is 2 peers with lived experience in incarceration, poverty, addiction, that work with a select group of individuals that have been identified by the Downtown Walking Patrol and our city ambassadors, and sometimes like city staff or corrections officers who say, you know what, this person has behavioral health issues, mental health issues that are alarming and somewhat frightening to the general public, but not necessarily criminal activity. It's really their manifestation of their addiction or mental health. And so these individuals are typically highly system resistant. They've been on the streets for long periods of time. And so the best relationships that they have had because of the continuity of the relationship had been walking patrol. And so what our walking patrol officers did is they introduced our 2 peers to these individuals, and slowly, through like daily contact with stopping by with a cigarette and some coffee, or saying hey, or giving rides to untraditional places like McDonald's, they built relationships with these individuals. And so that program, excitingly, is growing from 2 peers to 6 peers, and adding 2 mental health professionals and a program manager this year.
So it sounds like you put together a lot of partnerships with outside or adjacent agencies like transportation, like corrections, that aren't exactly mental health and police to help you and to inform you.
For sure, because anyone that works, lives, and plays in downtown Olympia is going to experience a community member, and they're going to want to help, and they're not going to know what to do to help them. And so that is really what our programs are suited to do, is to be like, hey, we know you don't want to just walk away from this, but you don't know what to do. We're here to do those things.
A lot of confused feelings when you see someone in distress and you don't know who to call, and maybe you've heard about somebody, but you don't know how to get it. So it sounds like you've made those connections.
Yeah. And a lot of times people are, not always, but sometimes people are reluctant to call the police because they recognize like the person doesn't necessarily maybe need police, or they don't want the person to have police contact, but also know that they need some kind of help. And, you know, up until this point, and traditionally, the police are the people that get the call when nobody knows who else to call.
Right. And there's a lot of confused feelings about whether the police are going to be compassionate toward this person who you know, the civilian sees as this person's having a mental health crisis, or something's going wrong. It's not some time to go to jail. So this is very new, and explaining this, I imagine that's a complicated communications issue.
Yes, maybe. Yeah.
Well, it builds up. Well, I mean, it sounds like you're in the midst of this at this point.
I mean, there's been we've made a lot of progress. We've come a long way, certainly through the course of my career, but even since the beginning of Walking Patrol. I mean, our downtown in a number of ways looks very, very different than it did 2 years ago. And that really is because of the relationships and the distance that we've traveled as a team in the past couple of years, and figuring out how these programs are going to work and making them work, and figuring out what success looks like, and working together.
Well, great. So your presentation for the conference was going to be called Grace, the Truth, and the Blue Light Special.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes, so, that is what we provide.
A little bit of both.
Well, unpack that a little bit. Tell me about what that. This is meaningful to you. It's a little obscure to me. What is the truth and the grace and the
Blue Light Special?
Tell us about the Blue Light Special.
Yeah, I get to, I think, mostly carry that torch of the Blue Light Special. So, I mean, we have some things that we say pretty regularly as we are talking about the programs or talking about the people that we serve in the programs. And, you know, people, us included, we like things to be very clear cut. It's just like we were talking about a moment ago, like people want to know, like, that if I call, that this is going to happen, or if I do this, I can expect that. Because life is a lot easier, right, when it's very black and white, it's very clear. And we like that. We all, I think, tend to, most of us anyways, crave familiarity, which none of us have right now, or consistency. But the reality is that that's really not true as people. We are not linear, fit in a box. We are all very unique. We are complicated, myself included. You know, some days I take 2 steps forward and then I take 3 steps back promptly. And so we're dealing with human beings, and sometimes the struggle with, and I'm not putting down any programs. I'm thankful for programs and services that are offered. But sometimes what ends up happening is because we want things to be very clear cut and fit into a box, it ends up excluding people who really need some help because they're outside of what ends up being provided. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, grace by definition is that you're getting something that you didn't earn or that you don't deserve. And so we kind of came into this process in these programs and into Walking Patrol with that we're going to provide grace, and we're going to couple that with truth, which is the kind of accountability piece and the reality piece. If we provide only grace and we're always doing nothing but offering things that are not earned and not deserved, it's really not very helpful. We would never do that as a parent to our children, right? Give them anything and everything they want. But if we give only the truth, that too is very, very hurtful, and it's not helpful. It's painful when we've all been on the end of that, of experiencing when someone gives us only truth. And so we really aim to provide grace and truth, and those things, you know, are kind of in constant motion. It's not like, oh, we're going to go interact with this person and provide some grace, or today we're going to go provide some truth. It is a combination of those things, and recognizing that because people are complex, and we're dealing with human beings with whole stories and whole lives, and we're just getting to see a piece of that, figuring out is grace the right thing right now? Is truth the right thing right now? 5 seconds from now, it might flip-flop and be different. And then occasionally there is the Blue Light Special. And sometimes that's, I guess, probably is, people would see that more as the truth side of things. But even within, and if you're not clear about the blue light special, it means, arresting someone and taking them to jail. But even within that process, still maintaining that principle of grace and truth. I don't have to be mean or abrupt or rude or uncompassionate just because I'm taking someone to jail. And, kind of the way that I think of it is, if my kid was going to walk off the edge of a cliff and I saw that was going to happen, I wouldn't provide so much grace that I would let them, by saying like, well, you can do whatever you want. I'm going to give you all the freedom in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I also know that you're going to die if you go off the edge of that. I wouldn't allow that. I would take away their freedom for that period of time because I care enough. And so kind of thinking about it like that there are times when a reset is appropriate. And as a team, we talk about that quite a bit.
This is a very different idealization of policing than we see in almost every city in the United States.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the evolution of how do other officers see what do other officers think what you're saying? Do they agree with you? And how is this what you're saying? How is that disseminating to other officers?
Yeah. So I'm not your question was, do police, this is very non-traditional or not what we've all been accustomed to. And that's very true. So we also talk a lot about the importance of really having the right people in the right seats on the bus in order to get where we're going. And changing culture, anybody who's tried to do it, it takes time. And so I'm way too honest to sit here and say that, oh yeah, every cop that works for OPD, thinks that this is just the most amazing thing ever, the way that I see things in the way that we might operate in walking patrol. However, we've taken a lot of time to make sure that we have the right people. And, for walking patrol, our 3 things were to be visible, to enforce the laws, and to build relationships. And so we spend a lot of time building relationships, and I could talk for the next hour about the benefits that we have seen, not just in the context of these specific programs, but in the larger context of law enforcement in general. The number of actual criminal things that we have been able to solve and hold people accountable for appropriately because of those relationships that we've built prior to that event ever happening is pretty impressive, in my opinion. So yeah, it is, I would say, I don't know, cutting edge. I'm not sure if that's the right term or whatnot. It's a lot about having the right people. As we look at this screen, I don't know if it's on people's right or left, but the officer with our friend Xana, and it says cops rule behind her, she's pretty constant in our downtown, and we've known her for a while, and she loves us. Not everyone does, but she does. And I don't know, she's probably taken at least hundreds, maybe thousands of pictures with my officers, with Anne. She texts Anne a lot. And so, it seems like a simple thing, but it's a big thing that officers are willing to just take a photo with her. That's what matters to her, and that has built that relationship. And not every officer would be super excited about doing that, but walking patrol, it's one of the things that, yeah, say yes if you can say yes. What does it cost us to take 5 seconds and take a photo? And it goes a long way with her. In the middle, you'll see, we'll talk probably later about Maya, and then that's myself and Anne, and Keith is the other person. So Maya is one of our Familiar Faces clients, and he was the recipient of the Blue Light Special. at one point while being a Familiar Faces client, and but we don't stop that relationship because they're in custody. Familiar Faces doesn't, and to the extent that I don't want it to stop for me, I don't stop that either. So I just went to visit Maya in jail, and basically just to say, hey, I know that, you know, yesterday or 2 days ago, we were having an interaction where you were getting put in the wrap and taken to jail, and you weren't super happy about it, but I'm still here. Just because we had this little whoopsie daisy doesn't mean that this relationship stops, or that I stop caring about the ultimate outcome for you and where you ultimately land. And then the last picture, the tall guy with all the tattoos there, he's one of my current walking patrol officers. The other officer now supervises our neighborhood policing unit. But yeah, anyways, right people is important.
Tell me the value of walking.
You see a lot more when you're walking than you do when you're in a car. And it really is just as simple as when you're walking down the sidewalk. You know, I'm not going to say that every one of my officers does this, but for me personally, a little bit about myself, I call myself an extroverted introvert. Like, I can be extroverted and very engaging when I need to be, which is often at work. But truly, I'm absolutely an introvert and recharge by being alone and no conversation. And small talk makes me, you know, break out in hives. So then I choose to go into this position, which is a lot of small talk. And so I just decided I was going to start saying hello or smiling or, you know, good morning or whatever to every single person I passed on the sidewalk. And I've just maintained that. Now, if I don't say hi, I get anxiety over the fact that I walked by someone and didn't say hello. And so just the things, it's just the relationship. You can't build a relationship with people when you're driving by in a car. It just doesn't lend itself to that. And so the value of walking or being on our bikes is huge. We would not have the results that we have from a walking patrol standpoint if we were not actually walking or riding our bicycles.
The secret to outreach is it's all about relationships.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't say that enough times. Yep, I agree.
I think we've got, let me see here. Let's see. I think in our next one is another visual for folks to kind of get an idea of what the two teams look like in a smaller version. And then Amy's walking patrol, and they also ride bikes. So on the left of the screen, the two individuals in black shirts next to me are our two current Familiar Faces peers, Keith and Melissa, and then myself, and then Javier, who's a downtown walking patrol officer. And then that's 3 of our crew team members. So there's 6 of them total, but there's 3 of them. And you can see that they're in uniform and on police radio. And that really is important for the community when they're driving by and seeing somebody in crisis, quote unquote, or in distress. They see that there is a response responding.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, and then Keith and Melissa, they're both wearing Catholic community stuff there, but they definitely wear a lot more hoodie, sweatshirts, and street clothes. You probably wouldn't maybe know that they're up here working with somebody unless you got up close and saw some sort of emblem on them.
And so just to understand, the peer workers are contracted through an outside agency?
Catholic Community Services.
Okay, good.
And then the crew team is contracted through Recovery Innovations.
Right, and that's an interesting organization. Talk a little bit about that.
So they applied for the RFP for the request for proposals. Really, both teams, it's unique. It's a unique relationship with both of the agencies that we contract with, because I'm very hands-on in both programs, and so I am their day-to-day face of like hey, Ann, can you help us with this or with that? The crisis response unit, in order to be successful to get up and running, it was super important. They were embedded here in the police department for 3 months before we even let them loose into the community. So they came to work Monday through Friday, just in street clothes, and spent a lot of time with officers doing ride-alongs, doing walk-alongs. They went to dispatch and sat with dispatchers. They went to every service provider meeting in town related to housing, homelessness, outreach, because we really, especially for the crisis response unit, needed community buy-in, provider buy-in, and law enforcement buy-in for it to be successful. And so it was really important when you talk about relationships, it's relationships with those individuals as well to be successful in any kind of work that you're going to do. It was really scary the first day that they went out live, because they were worried about being on police radio. I was worried for them. But it was really great. We had a couple officers, actually Javier was on light duty, and so he literally rode in the back of the van with them and helped them navigate the radio or geography, and like where to stand when you're co-responding with officers, you know, and Sergeant King and her team would come down. We did like a mini boot camp of radio, talking on the radio, scene safety, geography.
Yeah, introducing them to police culture, and kind of how they could expect officers to be thinking, or maybe what officers would be thinking about or paying attention to. So yeah, we spent quite a bit of time, but they have been, man, they hit the ground running, and I know they were concerned about being on the radio, and Ann was concerned for them, but they have done there's not in fact, I just said to them the other day that there's really not been a single time where I've heard any of them on the air where I was like, oh gosh, they've done a fantastic job. So, and I would, you know, one other note, I just want to make sure, maybe we made this point, but I'm not sure if it was clear, that when Keith and Melissa started, you know, on day one, they came walking with my team, and the whole purpose of that was to just take them around to places where we knew specific people that we wanted to have as clients would be. And it was just a, hey, so-and-so, good morning. You know, how are you doing? It's time to get up and get your day going. And hey, I just wanted to introduce you to, this is Keith, and you may see Keith around. He may check in with you. And then we would just walk off. Sometimes, depending upon the response, Keith would maybe hold back for a couple of minutes and make his own introduction to that person and then catch up with us. Or sometimes that would be it, and we would just continue on. But it was really just a very concerted effort to make sure that Keith and Melissa had faces to names so that they knew who we were talking about, and that we could give them you know, some context, like, this is our history with this person, this is what we know about them, these are the concerns that often come up with them, this, you know, and this is where typically you can find them, and if they're not here, they're probably going to be over here. And so that's kind of, and then once those introductions were made, then they were kind of, they've been off doing their own thing and figuring it out every day.
Yeah, and I think we actually, let's see here. So definitely, as Amy stated, and I don't know if I'm covering up Melissa's face with our screens, but the right people at all times, because we intersect with each other all the time. So Keith and Melissa, although they both have lived incarceration experience and they're both on active DOC supervision, they can change their language, and they kind of shift shape, or I don't know what the right term is, code switch or whatnot. So I don't know, but they are able to engage with their clients in a really authentic, amazing way with experiences that I don't have. And they're also able to call up Sergeant King or Sergeant Fraley or Officer O'Brien and say, hey, it's Keith. I got this. Can you help me with that? Like, and then they're also able to go sit into a room full of providers and advocate for their clients. And so finding individuals that are so invested in the outcomes of people that they're able to like see how this all works together when you work with law enforcement and you work with providers and you work with the individual, and not get so caught up. Sometimes people get so caught up in seeing someone like Sergeant King and being like, oh, we already know what she's all about. She decided to become a law enforcement officer. We don't. Yeah. And so I think that is like the absolute coolest thing to me, is to see how it's like a complete culture shift. We all work together. I think Keith talks to more law enforcement officers than I do on a daily basis. Same with Melissa.
Talk me through a little bit about how officers are able to protect the credibility of these peer workers. It seems like it'd be pretty easy to get a street tag jacket that says you're a snitch. You're just fronting for these cops.
So it really falls more, I would give that credit to Keith and Melissa than to my officers. Keep it on a daily basis. The contact that I or my officers have with Keith and Melissa is usually by phone or via text. I don't necessarily see them. I might see them when I'm downtown because they do spend time downtown. But if we do, we don't stop and like have a chit chat with them unless they initiate that and want to do that. People that they're working with downtown, it's not like it's a big secret. It's not like, none of them, like we've been able to keep it under wraps, nor do we want to necessarily. And so people know that there is some connection between Keith and Melissa and OPD. But again, it goes back to the relationships in that Keith and Melissa they're not snitches. They along with us are working for the best outcomes for people. And, if it comes down, and really, I've only seen, I guess, and you can talk to this, Ann, if you think of something else, but I've really only seen it be a big issue when the blue light special comes into play. And we are very careful, meaning OPD and my officers, to not involve Keith and Melissa in that. I'm not saying they're never aware, but we're not going to go and arrest somebody at the moment that Keith and Melissa are with them because, I know that they're hanging out with so-and-so, so we're going to choose that time because we know where they are. Like, it doesn't work like that. We don't at all. And we just don't do that. And so, there's good communication because if we are going to arrest somebody that's on their client list, I want them to know that, because I know they're going to want to go see them in jail. I know they're going to want to be there as a support, and I want them to be there as a support. But it's not the kind of thing where Keith and Melissa are calling us and being like, hey, I know that, so-and-so didn't show up and this is where they are, like that kind of stuff just doesn't happen. So the other thing too is that we, as walking patrol, have worked really hard to have credibility with all of our people downtown. And, occasionally when I run into someone new or maybe someone that I don't know super well, I'm trying to think of a specific example of a conversation, but I will say to people like, hey, feel free to ask about me, ask around about me. Yeah, like when I'm telling someone, like, go ahead, because I know what they're going to hear, because I know what I go downtown and I know what my officers go down and do every day. Mm-hmm. And it's consistent. And so you can talk to whoever you want to talk to downtown, but you're all going to hear the same thing about Sergeant King and walking patrol, because what you see is what you get. And I'm always very straight up and very honest with people. And that's just, and I think as a unit, that's how we behave. We really do treat people respectfully. We do care about them. And so when you care and you're invested, you fight harder for the best outcome. So
it's been a transition too. So I would say that the community itself was more worried about the crisis response unit being snitches than Keith and Melissa. Yeah. So they were worried that the crisis response unit, because they're on police radio and they wear more of a uniform, that they would be snitches. And they have been nothing close to being anything. And so that was like the biggest concern. And it was a gradual relationship building. So Keith came on in November of 2018, and Melissa didn't come on until April. We had a person that was a peer and transitioned to the crisis response unit. And the first day that, and this really goes to a lot of grace, but the first day that Keith came to OPD, he had never been in the belly of a police department walking around freely in his life. I think he has 24 felony convictions. And so and he's on active DOC, and he's like the greatest dude I've ever met. He's a great employee. And so he comes into the belly of the police department, and we actually go and talk to the officer that's there on the left, O'Brien, and it was maybe Tomzik who's with them in that picture, or somebody else. And Keith is just like kind of nervous, and he's doing his whole like, he's very expressionful human. And he looks at O'Brien and he's like, okay, so how's this gonna go down today? Am I good cop, you're bad cop? Like, and I was like, my eyes popped out of my head and I was mortified. I was like, oh my gosh. And O'Brien just said, hey man, let's just go out and walk around and see how things go. And I was like, so thankful at that point for him being like, you know what, this dude's obviously a little nervous. He's not around law enforcement a lot. And then, we're walking around and I hear Keith ask O'Brien about politics. And I was like, mind blown. And O'Brien's like, yeah. And I'm like, and O'Brien's like, probably not the best thing to talk about. And so I think really everybody in the when you're in need, you want someone that's showing up. And honestly, like, they don't care if it says Catholic Community Services, Recovery Innovations, OPD. They're like, when someone wants help and someone's helping them, they're saying thank you.
And from a police perspective, I mean, like I said earlier, call us. And the one thing about the police is we're always going to show up, regardless. But when we don't have an answer because, we have somebody who is struggling with some severe mental health issues or is struggling with some severe addiction issues and they're not committing any crimes, I wish I did, but I don't as a police officer, I don't have a place to take them or some kind of solution. I mean, I can try and mitigate the immediate situation, but that's not really, that may be a solution that works and really is not one that lasts. And those are not necessarily the solutions that I'm most interested in. And so one of the best parts about Crew and Familiar Faces is that the answer is yes. Yes, we will show up. Yes, when you call us, we will come. And I understand, I mean, it's not like they have unlimited access to anything and everything, but there's a lot of power in, yes, we will come, we will help, we will do what we can. So this is the center picture on the top. There is our friend Kat. And that was one of her booking photos on one of her blue light special days. So Kat, I met downtown in just prior to walking patrol starting in June of 2018. Well, not just prior, but in the months prior to that, Olympia we've always had a homeless population downtown. As long as I've been a cop here, that has been part of Olympia's landscape. But definitely in the last number of years, there has been an explosion of that, as other cities have faced that as well. And so for us, in about a 3-month period, we went from about 30 tents in our downtown area to over 300 in a parking lot. And so at the very, very beginning, when there was, when I came to work on a Monday morning and there were 5 tents in one parking lot and I was freaking out, Kat was one of them. And that's where he would have contact literally every day, usually more than once a day. And Kat likes to collect things. And so she would, in the matter of hours, certainly within 24 hours when I would come back the next morning to work, if she had been depleted for some reason of things the day before, by the time I returned, she would have about a 400 square foot apartment, be able to fill it with the stuff that she had accumulated overnight. And that's not an exaggeration. She would have a full dining room set, complete with 6 chairs. She had lazy boys. She had filing cabinets. She had headboards. You name it, she had it. And so, it was a constant battle with her in that the places she would choose to be with her stuff. She also has a dog, Paco, which we got some pictures of him. And Paco's not a nice dog. I'm just putting that out there. He's cute, but he ain't nice. And so, she would choose places to be that were really not the best choices, and was very resistant to shelter placement. And then she had all this stuff, which is its own issue, and we could do a whole episode on stuff. And so I would bargain with Kat, and I would beg and I would plead, and tried everything I could think of to gain her compliance, to avoid the blue light special. This was pre-Familiar Faces or pre-crew team being out in the world with us. And eventually, Familiar Faces did start, crew started, and there was a day in which the location that she had set up her house was just on the scale, was on the really, really bad end of places. And so I woke her up, said, "You have some time. How much time do you need?" She said, "I need 2 hours." Great, I'll give you 2 hours. I didn't want to arrest her. One, because I didn't think it was going to be a solution that was really going to last in the way that I wanted. Wasn't going to affect the change I really wanted. And 2 was the stuff, because I have to somehow be responsible for this small apartment's worth of belongings that all has to be inventoried. And so that's where I'm going to assign an officer to do that. I don't want to do that if I'm the one making the arrest. That doesn't seem fair or equitable or right, even if I have the authority to do that. I don't have any place to keep it. And it's taking it would take an entire day of time, whether it's myself or someone else having to deal with the stuff. So I really was trying to avoid the blue light special. But we get to a point, I go back 2 hours later, Kat has not moved a millimeter. Right. And I feel like I do have a lot of grace, and I extend a lot of grace. And I'm a big proponent of it, but I also, the other side, and what folks would say downtown, is when Sergeant King does make a decision, she's likely to stick with it. And so the truth, we'd had some truthful conversations, Kat and I, many of them, and then we got to the blue light special. So I came back and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll get going." And I said, "No, don't worry about it, you're under arrest." And she had a little walkie-talkie. She started crying, and that's the look she had on her face for the majority of our time together that day. But she got on her walkie-talkie, started calling people all over downtown who started showing up, and she started gifting them all of her possessions, to include Paco. And so by the time it was all said and done, and I had a car there to transport her, all she had was her pants and her shirt and her shoes. And and the stuff from was kind of solved. It was still
That's
downtown.
impressive. That is impressive.
Yeah, I was honestly impressed.
Had that experience.
And you know, she doesn't know, but like in my mind, I was just like, hallelujah, because I didn't know what I was going to do with this stuff. But anyway, so that was her first introduction to the Blue Light Special, and then she became a Familiar Faces client, and I'll let Anne kind of pick it up from there because she knows more about that.
Yeah, so Kat was bouncing from encampment to encampment downtown. Paco is not a nice dog, and so it really was her downfall because he would bite people, and so he would bite somebody at a shelter, and then she would be barred from that shelter. And so she was in the mitigation site, which is a sanctioned encampment in downtown Olympia. She had bounced from to like B Avenue, which was unsanctioned, and the Smart Lot. She was in the mitigation site after being, like Amy said, in different places around downtown, and she was being exited from the mitigation site, which is supposed to be the safety net of where you end up.
Right.
And she was in really poor health, and was a lot of folks have incontinence issues, and so she was in poor health. She wasn't making it to the bathroom. She had Paco. She had all this food in her tent, and so Melissa and I showed up, and it was Melissa's first day, and we boarded Paco and this stuff, and we took her to the bridge. To tell you, I mean, we had nowhere else to take her. We took her to a bridge, and immediately all of her stuff is stolen. They ostracize her, and she hit bottom for Kat. And so we were checking in with her, and she decided that she would go to detox, but who was going to watch Paco, all of these kind of things. And so in the left-hand corner, that's Melissa and I taking Kat to detox, and then her detox in the bottom. Melissa stepped up and took Paco for 4 nights while Kat was in detox, because otherwise she would have never gone. So we hustled and we moved and we shaked and we got Kat into detox. And then magically we had been hustling and taking her to interviews out at Coyote Village, where she is with the officer in the trike on the bottom and up with Lieutenant Emerson in the top. We got her into Coyote Village, which was huge because she had to have a clean UA, which she did because we snagged her right out of detox and got her in to get her UA. And Melissa begged, bartered, and pleaded and found a place up in Tacoma to neuter Paco because Kat's dog had to be neutered. So we did a lot of stuff that was above and beyond and boundary pushing. I mean, usually peers don't take a dog, or we don't usually, I mean, we are always transporting individuals in our vehicles and always working through every single step with them. So Kat gets to Coyote Village, and she is in community court because Sergeant King had arrested her, and it was a charge that could go to community court, which is great. And honestly, it was very, you would think, but it's kind of a reverse, is that she's at Coyote Village and she's doing typical former homeless activities. She's hoarding food. Mm-hmm. She is not regulating her emotions when she's being confronted, and she's not getting violent, but she threw a root vegetable on the ground. And she's in survival mode. She's been homeless for 4 years. Yep. And she's a victim of multiple layers of trauma. And so actually it was Sergeant King and myself and Melissa that went out there and had to teach the resident advocate out there, have a little grace, have a little compassion. This woman has been homeless for 4 years. She's going to grow into it. I know she's not the easiest personality in the world. I'm not asking you to love her. I'm asking you to keep her housed. And so we really worked closely with that and gave Kat an enormous amount of grace during those first few months that she was at Coyote and advocated for her to stay there. And she is still there. She has had a ton of things that have happened. She has had cancer. She has been unsuccessful in going to IOP. But she has, and I think it's strange for her as well, is that I think the 4 people she considers her closest allies are a woman that's formerly incarcerated, a lieutenant at the jail, a sergeant at OPD, and myself. And so, because when you aren't using drugs or selling drugs anymore, and you don't have what someone's looking for, you lose everything.
Yeah, they're not around it.
They're not around anymore. So she's still with us. I just saw her yesterday. And we could talk Kat for days, but yeah, it really is a balance of all of us at times.
Yeah, and Kat has definitely had some ups and downs since she's been in Coyote Village. And, there was one day where, I don't even remember what precipitated it, but myself and Ann and Melissa went over to community court and, found a quiet space in the back and had a little truth conference, essentially. I provided a lot of truth that day. Melissa was pretty quiet, I guess, and I think you did the grace. And I don't want it to sound like, these are scripted roles, because they're really not, but we as a team really work well together and have spent a lot of time building those relationships internally. And so, we had a grace and truth. And then because I knew that day there was a lot of truth coming from me, then I made a point after some time passed to reach out to Kat via text and give a little grace, and a little encouragement. And, one of the things when I'm texting or talking with one of the folks that are on Familiar Faces in particular, I often end it with, I'm on team, whatever, I'm on team Kat, I'm on team Maya, because I really am on their team. I want them to be successful, right? That looks best for me as a police officer. In the big picture, right, is if I'm not having to have repeated contacts with people. So it's a win-win all the way around. So anyways, and so we all, I don't text her every week or anything, but I make a point to stay in touch. I wrote her a letter because I had heard from Melissa some of the challenges that she was struggling with. And so it was really just a letter of a lot of grace, a little bit of truth, and some encouragement. You got this, you can do this. I know it's hard, life is hard, but you have a support system, and we believe in you, and you got to show up for your life. So,
I just want to ask a couple questions for clarification. You have permission from Kat to speak about her?
Yep. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me for just briefly, what sort of mental health or addiction treatment Kat has been offered by the services in your area?
Yeah, so she went to detox for meth addiction, and part of her commitment to community court is she was supposed to go to inpatient treatment, and that was all set up. She really resisted that because of Paco, and because she felt that once she was at Coyote, she didn't need inpatient, she needed intensive outpatient. But after her CDP assessment, it was like, nope, she needs inpatient. She unfortunately got a big monkey wrench in the form of a uterine cancer diagnosis. And so we all said, oh my gosh, we need to take care of your cancer diagnosis first. So she ultimately had surgery. Melissa and I both spent time up in Tacoma. Melissa, the heavy weight of it, getting her to get the shower beforehand and picking her up at a hotel and all that kind of stuff. So Kat went through surgery, and then she recovered at home. We organized meals for her to be delivered. And then that is kind of where she kind of reverted back a little bit, and like, not in using, but more in the inertia of life, of like, I can't make it, texting, I don't feel well, all that kind of stuff. So she started intensive outpatient, and then that fell through. And she had to resolve some conflicts out at her housing, where she had a no contact order with a few of the other residents out there. So that kind of threw some monkey wrenches in her plan. But she desperately, and once this COVID period is over, she needs to go back to intensive outpatient. She has a lot of trauma. She definitely needs to do some trauma work, and some talk therapy. I think she's on a pretty steady, she's managing her prescription meds well, but she has a ton of health related issues, which are real, and also a roadblock for her and her own continued growth.
I think that my point of asking is to sort of clarify that people coming out of homelessness have a multitude of issues, and it's very difficult to know, chicken and egg, how do we, where do we start with a person who's resistant, not participating in this service, and yet needs all this help.
Yeah. People are complicated.
Humans are hard.
Yep. But change happens in community and connection, which is, about that relationship thing again. Like, that's when I look at my own life, when I make changes, it's because I feel connected and supported and accepted and valued, and it gives me the space then to make a change if I want to.
Good. So you talked about your approach. Let's talk about the model that you're implementing here.
All right. Well, we think of it more as an approach as opposed to a model. So
okay.
we certainly don't have everything figured out. We have some principles that we kind of operate off of. We've talked about those some. One of the things I love about Anne's approach in starting these programs is that they're programs of yes. The answer is yes, unless it's unethical or illegal. We're going to always strive to say yes. And that has been something I think we would stick with.
For sure.
And then also the right people. I had something else in my head I was just going to say.
I think it really is one of those things where I was talking about this yesterday with another service provider, is I could create a beautiful model, a beautiful program, but if in my core it's something on paper that I'm just gonna like assign a duty to, you'll fail miserably. Like, at my core, I believe mental health and addiction are most likely best treated through jail and hospital diversion. Obviously, there's a time and a place for everything, but in my core, I believe that people need people, not a program or a model. And so that is really like where everything we do comes from. It's very client-driven or consumer-driven approaches. And one of the ways that this approach, and I'm going to go back, this is one of our clients, but go back to this client in particular, is comparing model versus approach. So maybe a model that a service provider provides is that they provide housing for single women, or they provide chemical dependency treatment, or they provide non-emergent medical care. And so we're asking a human that is struggling, has no safety net, to manage these different models. This is what the model you go to for this. This is the model you go to for that. And so this individual on our screen, who is okay with her photo being here, when we first encountered her, she was single, homeless, victim of domestic violence. In the year that we worked with her, you know what? We found out she was pregnant after we got her housed into a supportive housing unit for single females. The housing unit says, we don't do pregnant people, we don't do babies. So you're gonna need to either choose to put your baby up for adoption or other alternatives, or you're gonna be homeless. So we were like,
what kind of choice is that?
Yeah. And it was really true. This has happened now with another one of our clients, is no one ever said, congratulations on your pregnancy, except for her peer was the first person that said, hey, congratulations on your pregnancy. And so with this approach, we said, we're with you no matter what. And so we worked our tails off and we got her into a housing unit for pregnant mothers that have addiction and mental health. And then she had her baby early, and Melissa was in the labor and delivery room with her. I never said, oh no, we don't go into hospitals, we don't help people have babies. Has the baby. We all love on this baby who is now 8 months old, and I get pictures of him 3 or 4 times a week, and it makes me the happiest person ever. But this individual, she's an amazing human. She's also super complicated and super tough sometimes. So she moved 11 times last year. We moved her 11 times until we finally got her moved into an apartment 2 or 3 days before Christmas. And that move-in day was Sergeant King's husband, one of my best friends, Keith, Melissa, and our client. And so that's an approach. That's not a model. Like, that's an approach to how you engage the community you work within. So I get really about people trying to define what we do. As long as it's not illegal or unethical, I will say yes. And I have Amy and other people that say, maybe you should think twice about that, Dan. I mean, I also don't want it to sound like we have zero boundaries. Yeah, because we do.
So tell me about that for a moment. Just tell me how you lift off the pedal. How do you decide, okay, that's enough, I've got to go on, there's other people, I've got to move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I can think of a couple of things. Is like, I mean, like with Kat, for instance, we've kind of lifted the pedal a little bit there because we're still invested in Kat, still very much care, but we're now at a point where Kat needs to show up for her life, and she needs to do some things. And so, I know Melissa has had to make some shifts a little bit in their relationship to kind of reestablish what boundaries look like. And so, that one of the things about having the right people is, I will say that Keith and Melissa are honestly probably maybe the two most or very near the top of the most emotionally intelligent people I've ever met in my life. And so they're very good. There's also, as we've said multiple times, a lot of communication amongst us as a team. And so there's not one of us that's like out there rogue, figuring, like, well, I think I'm going to do this today. And so, yeah. And so we've been lucky. We have been. And so we do talk. And if there's something that, like, what do y'all think about this? And it doesn't come up in the sense of like, gosh, I got this really harebrained idea, and I think, what do you guys think about it? But it's more like, hey, this is where so-and-so's at, or I just talked to so-and-so, and this kind of seems to be what's going on. Just, either FYI, just want everybody to be aware, or, frequently there will be a text between myself and, say, Keith or Melissa saying, hey, I just saw so-and-so, anything I should know, because they probably have had more contact with that person than maybe I have. And so I'm just looking for, is there anything I can offer? And maybe they're like, nope, everything's good. Or yeah, this is kind of what's up with them. And so it might be a good time to remind them or encourage them, or, challenge them to make sure that they meet this appointment, or whatever it may be. So,
but they've achieved some degree of stability. They're in some more stable housing. Yeah. They're not in active danger. They have now access to treatment services. These are all great outcomes.
Well, and two, I love to use the parenting example, is the way that you treat your 5-year-old is different than the way you treat your 15-year-old. Yep. And so, and I'm not saying that our clients are 5 or, act like, I'm just saying that there are times in their journey where, yeah, we need to have much more eyes on, intensive, finger really closely on the pulse. Mm-hmm. And then as they continue to grow and they get to different stages, they can get up and make their own breakfast. We don't need to do that anymore for them. And it wouldn't be very nice if we were trying to continue to do things for them that they have clearly demonstrated they're capable of doing for themselves. Mm-hmm.
But they still they are with the person on the screen right now. I mean, she's 41 and she's been homeless the majority of her life, and she grew up in a very abusive family life and was a victim of DV multiple times. And so we can't she's not like a library book that we return. I mean, so we spend a lot of time with them, and maybe the time is picking her up to take her to Verizon, and it's an hour. You pick her up and the baby, and you go to Verizon and you pay the Verizon bill, and you grab a Starbucks and you bring her home. But she'll text me, and she maybe texts Sergeant King, and I know she texts Melissa all the time. It's she had to call law enforcement on her neighbors, and she said, was that the right thing to do? She's not an unintelligible person, but she might be illiterate in how to talk to her housing manager or balance her day. If you've never had a schedule or a day, how do you balance those things? Or money management. So as they grow, their opportunities grow, and it's an opportunity for us to help guide them through those continued steps. And so, we were in a panel last summer, and someone asked Keith, well, do you ever say no? And he's like, yeah, I do say no. And you know what? When I say no, they know it's not because I don't want to help them or because I can't, I'm too lazy to help them. It's because I'm doing something else. And they're like, okay, they know that. When we tell our clients, I can't give you a ride, they don't get belligerent on us. They're they know that we would if we could, but they're like, okay, no problem. Got it. I'll figure out the bus or whatnot.
Well, that's part of the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, there's some really practical things in terms of boundaries. One of our clients, and I think there's a slide about him, Michael, Keith and one of our other sergeants were very involved with him, Sergeant Fraley. And there was a point where Michael was in custody for, I think, a little over a year or just under a year. So it was a significant amount of time. And, and Sergeant Fraley, Michael is a guy that would call 911 incessantly. And I think most communities have those types of folks. Michael might set some records because we're talking thousands, hundreds within an 8-hour shift.
Oh,
yeah, really high numbers. And we had, he's been around for a long time and has struggled with alcohol and mental health for a long time. And so it reached a fever pitch, and we arrested him. But Sergeant Fraley had to try and mitigate it prior to his arrest, he would let Michael call him when he was working graveyard, and he would just keep Michael on the phone for hours. If he was able to, he would just walk around with his phone and Michael would just talk. And Michael didn't know whether, I mean, Sergeant Fraley was theoretically there, but he didn't really have to contribute a lot to the conversation, but to keep him from calling 911. And so, there was a point when he's going through that court process in which, although Sergeant Fraley would go and visit Michael in jail to touch base with him, and to initially Keith had to have an escort, although that's changed. He told Michael, like, I can't come and sit in court with you. I can't come and support you in that process. It's really a case by case. I'm usually Sergeant King to pretty much all of them. You know what I mean? Just a simple thing like using my first name. There are moments and times, depending upon the scenario and the context, where they might be present and I might introduce myself as Amy, but I never lose sight of the fact that I know that my job is a police officer, and it could be that absolutely there could come a time in which I would have to arrest one of them, and I'd still care about them, but I don't lose sight of my role and professionally, and recognizing that I might be called upon in that kind of scenario again with one of them. So
let me see here. Yeah, and this just kind of goes to point to of the approach that we take, and that Amy's officers take. So Big C turned 40, and he's one of our clients, and he's actually got 3 jobs now. I saw him yesterday.
You
he's like,
me to this guy on the street in Olympia a few months
ago. Maybe. Yeah. So he's got 3 jobs. He's kicking it. He's gonna buy a used Tahoe. He's a great guy, but he turned 40, and in my world, when you have a birthday, you get to pick your birthday dinner, or you get to go out to dinner. And so 40 is a big deal. And so I said, we're going to take you out to lunch. And so Keith, Melissa, and then Amy's gold shift team right there, Javier and Patrick, we said, where do you want to go to lunch? And he's like, Buffalo Wild Wings. And I was like, yay!
He had a plan.
But it's his birthday, right? And so they can do stuff like that. Patrick can go to court and support a graduate of mental health court. And then there's things that Keith and Melissa and I can do, but you can push. Like he was, Big C was, his mind was blown. He still talks about the fact that we took him out, and he loves those pictures to death. Like he shows people, like, look who took me out to lunch. And after lunch, he realized he locked his keys in his car. I picked him up at where he lived. And so the 2 officers in the photo with him went and helped him Slim Jim into his car. And he was like so blown up. Like all those little things are so impactful on the community as a whole, because his relationship with law enforcement has changed. And in that change slowly rolls out like a community change on the connections that we have with our folks.
Well, it seems another important aspect here is that Sergeant King, your officers are not afraid.
No.
And I'm not talking about I've got a gun, I've got a car, I've got the law on my side afraid.
Right. Yeah.
What's that about?
What is that about? I got the right people, man. No, they're not. In fact, one of them, I won't say which one, but has said to me, Sarge, I feel really confident that we could shed our uniforms entirely and go down and do our job the exact same way that we do it, with the same results without a uniform. And I think that's absolutely true. We have built enough relationships that sometime, and honestly, if I could get rid of anything, it would be my uniform, just because I didn't get tired of wearing it. But and yeah, and we talk a lot, I guess, in my unit about what does it cost us to be kind? Can we still accomplish what we're trying to accomplish? If that is taking somebody to jail or solving a crime, can we do that and still be kind? Of course we can. So why wouldn't we? Why would we not? It's money in the bank for us at a later time. And it makes us safer in the big scheme of things. And so I can't figure out why. I could wax on for a while about why I think that has not been traditionally, it is not traditionally how law enforcement has approached it.
Well, you just said something, and this is the argument that penetrates, I think, at the commissioner level, is it makes you safer.
Yeah, I do believe that. Like, it is. I don't want to be comparing apples and oranges, but it's kind of like, it's really hard to argue with somebody who's not arguing with you. And it's really hard to hurt somebody who's not trying to hurt you. It's really hard to be mean to somebody when someone, no matter what, continues to just be that calm and steady and kind voice. And again, there's also, I think about the idea of just being angry in general, not related to law enforcement, but just like, I can be passionate about something and I can actually take action without having to get angry about something, which is a concept that I think is hard for a lot of people, that you don't have to get mad to make change. And so I guess that's just kind of what we've carried on, or how we, I want my officers to view things, and the interactions that they have is, if we can still do the job that we have been commissioned to do, and do it while being kind and extending grace and compassion, I just don't understand why we wouldn't. I've never had a bad outcome when I've been nice.
And Amy, or Sergeant King, she's allowed me to be on her interview panels for upcoming positions in walking patrol, along with a civilian downtown business owner. Was the last panel I was on. She's been on all the panels we've had for familiar faces. Like, we hired a MHP, or even everyone on crew. And so our interview panels are a representation of law enforcement, social service, community, so that, and actually on the last round, I was like, I really, I was super surprised on how amazing. I was like, I never knew that about so-and-so. And it really opened me up, because it's the humanness. And then one of the people, I was like, I just wanted him to be a little bit more human. And so I think that, when you ask for other perspectives on who you're bringing onto a team, it's really important.
Yeah, well, what you're doing is extraordinary. So tell me about the risks that you've decided to take on here. You have a lot of different areas.
Yeah, we've taken a lot of risks.
Yeah.
And I think led the charge, though, in starting these programs. And she can speak better to that, but we've hired, or in her programs, we've hired, folks that have felony convictions, as we've said. We have hired folks that have history of mental health and addiction issues, and it was a risk in hiring them. It is a risk for them to have a relationship with us. There's a risk for us to have a relationship with them. And so, but you have to, if we're going to try new things, and if we're going to figure out new ways, then there's going to have to be a willingness to take some reasonable risks. And, you should proceed thoughtfully and make sure that you get the input that you need, and that you're listening to other people. And but you also have to
a little bit, because hiring peers in law enforcement has been stopped all over the country, because chiefs and commissioners have said, we can't do that. It's just, we can't for whatever reason. How did you get around doing that? What did you do?
Honestly, it wasn't intentional in the beginning. So we had interviews with Catholic Community Services, and Keith and Charlie at the time were the two people that rose to the top. And then we, you know, obviously Keith is well versed. Anyone that's formerly incarcerated that's trying to make it in this world has had to explain themselves a million times and why we should take a risk on them. And so he had a typed up document of the why behind all of his charges. And really, it was addiction and poverty. And I'm not trying to excuse, and he would never try to make excuses for any of the things that he's done, but to have a context of like, oh, instead of just seeing a robbery one, what is the robbery one? You know, what is behind everything? And so I just knew that Keith was the best egg for the job. And in the beginning, he bolted out of the stables like so fast. I was like, whoa. I mean, I thought he was going to give the clothes off of his back. He was giving people his own coffees, and like but it was so much more refreshing for me to have someone, and I think for law enforcement to say like, oh my God, this guy's going in just as fast and furious as we are. No one can be afraid of the population you serve. And so you have to take, you know, precautions, and sometimes I'll say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. And they'll say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. So we take precautions, but I was nervous, to tell you the truth, but I'd be nervous with any new hire that I brought on. I look for honesty in everybody that works with me, and he's never lied to me a day that we worked together. I would trust him with my life in certain situations. And Melissa's the same way. She was a bigger hurdle for me to overcome, so I had her, she interned with me first. She's getting her bachelor's at Evergreen State College. And I did some weaseling, you know, I kind of did some, well, look who's here today. I got an intern. I did a little bit of asking for forgiveness, but I never had to. And then you would think, it's really funny, like I hear no, and I just think, well, they're just not ready. And so you can creatively work around anything. We're trying to, and they will be OPD or city employees within the next few months. And talk about, that's a huge hurdle.
That is a, yeah, I've not heard of that anywhere in the country. This is the persuasive skill of the peer in question, the program manager, you, and your police chief, who clearly is going to let you do what you need to do.
Yeah, I'm really lucky. So when I came here, I was like, I will come here, but I cannot be micromanaged. And so I work hard. I hustle, and I work really hard. And not everybody was on board with crew in the police department because they're on police radio and they're driving around to scenes. And not everybody is, I would say, like whoop-de-daisy about having formerly incarcerated individuals at the police department. But we did a survey a couple months back on both programs because we were looking to expand them. And they were like, if you would have asked me 6 months ago what I thought about hiring formerly incarcerated individuals, I would have been super negative. And now I need to eat crow, because really I think what everybody wants is to know that someone's got their back, someone's working just as hard as they are. And the results that we've had with our peers and with crew is just phenomenal. I mean, we have, not everybody that we come in contact, you know, ends up housed and, you know, working a program and bagging groceries at the Safeway. But the amount of contact that they have with law enforcement definitely goes down, and that's what we're here to do.
Well, what you're doing is extraordinary. I really compliment you for your integrity and for your persistence and for just the effort. And please say thank you to your colleagues. And
sure.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks for having us and letting us talk about our programs. It's one of our favorite things to do because we see some really exciting things happening, and telling the story is important to us because we would hope that other communities could benefit as well. Mm-hmm. So we're appreciative of being able to be a part of it.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.